Hey, and welcome back to the podcast. We are in the second week of July, and it's been a little bit crazy, David. We are rocking and rolling though. Me and David were both at high school camp last week, and now I am up in a cabin in New Mexico on vacation, and David's about to leave to drive 4 hours to go help out a buddy. So we're moving and rocking and doing all kinds of things. But with that being said, we are continuing the conversation for the month of July, which is the idea of faith in a digital world. And so last week we talked about students and basically this idea of who students are becoming online. And so this week we are kind of taking a little bit different of a approach. And I really feel like we hit this all the time, David, but like it continues to be probably the most needed and the most important conversation that I see over and over and over again. And that's just the idea of contentment. That's the idea of comparison. But from a student perspective this time, because with that, social media is a monster. And we really, really have a lot to deal with when it comes to social media. And so, so just open it up for a second, and kind of talk through like the struggle that they have, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I love this idea of like if we're not careful, if we don't address it, students will silently carry it. And that is just true blanketed. There's so many things that we think, well, we'll address it as students, bring it up. But the truth is, so many students are, because of comparison, they're too afraid to say the things that they're struggling with because they're afraid they're going to be judged. They're afraid they're going to be perceived a certain way. And so many times they will silently carry things. And unless you just have a really good relationship, because on the other hand, I also see a lot of students who are overly open about the things that they struggle with. And I say overly just in the sense where sometimes they share something and you're like really, really honored they shared, but then at the same time you're like, I really didn't want to know that. You know what I mean? Like sometimes they get a little, and you're just like, I don't feel safe knowing that. Like, you know what I
When
mean?
I was
And
11, I
yeah. Mm-hmm.
yep.
And some of those things, and you're just like, man, I wish I could just pluck that out of your brain and out of your heart, and
Mm-hmm.
have never that had never happened to you, and different things like that. But obviously, it's real too, and we're honored in those moments, and we have to obviously address those accordingly. But more times than not, on a much lighter situation, there is a bit of a silent struggle where um, students don't necessarily just walk into the group saying, I'm struggling with comparison, help me. Like, it's not like a talk show where they're like sitting on a couch like, all right, Dr. Phil, here's what's wrong, fix me. More times than
Yeah.
not, they just silently struggle and they carry it. And every day they're exposed to basically a highlight reel. I mean, if you think about what social media is, it's literally called a reel. Like, I don't know. What's funny is it's a real REEL, but it's treated like it's real REAL, and this is their
Yeah.
life, and it's green grass and perfect, and the truth is, like, you don't necessarily, even when they're like, let me take you behind the scenes of a day in the life of an influencer, and they're like, well, at first I start off this way and this way, and I'm like, that's even a curated highlight reel. Your behind the scenes blooper crap is as much a highlight reel as anything else,
Yeah.
because you took 20 takes to get that blooper reel.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's just one of those things, but students really do perceive this as people's lives are better than mine, and I can't compare to it because it truly is a highlight reel. It's curated, it's unrealistic standards that are placed on these students, and even the people who are posting that content that get paid and have a lot of influence and a lot of followers. Their standards are unrealistic, and
Yeah.
not just the standards that they put on themselves, but the ones that other people place on them, because then it becomes a life lived based on people's opinions. And that is a dangerous, slippery slope. And so many of our students are living that every day. They
Yeah.
get their self-worth through that. They get their identity through that. And if we don't start talking about it, students are going to process it alone.
Yeah. Well, and I think also there's a couple things, and it made your comments about the real and fake, and they get paid promotions and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Made me think of there's a new park that opened up in Plano. I think Plano or Arlington or something of that nature, and like there was a bunch of hype because it was a Universal Studios park in Plano or
Oh,
in
really?
Arlington, whatever. But it was
Yeah.
specifically for kids, like 3 to 9. And so
Nice.
like there's all this stuff going on talking about all these different things and like how cool it is, and all these different people are pushing these huge promotions and all this stuff. And then there's a news reporter that came out and he was like, this park sucks. He was like, all these people are getting paid to say this park is amazing. This park is terrible. Do not go to this park. But it's
Thank
that
you, random
it's
person, to tell the
yeah,
truth.
but it's that idea of like there's so much going on and there's so many things where like, and I think going back to students, like you said, it's not that they just walk in and be like, today I really feel like I'm struggling with comparison. I think part of it is just it's unknown.
Yeah.
Students don't really know comparison to that value yet.
Mm-hmm.
And like realistically, most adults don't either, if we're honest,
Uh-huh.
because you see it in their social media all day, every day. You see all the people that are using filters when they take their photos. You see all
Mm-hmm.
the people that are just posting the highs, really don't talk about anything negative, which I get. I mean, in some ways, you don't want to air your dirty laundry on the internet. Um, but I think that they're, especially when it comes to students are looking at all this other stuff and they're like, man, my life is miserable.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
what they don't see is when they actually have it better than the other person, because outside of those 15-second reels, the person that's posting all that stuff, their life is miserable, because they're constantly striving for the acceptance of others. They're constantly striving for this idea that just like they have to be perfect. And it's like, I it's not the case. And so like when we look at this, like students come in, like, and I think there's some telltale signs that you can probably look at and begin to see. And the first and foremost is like when you talk to students and they're just like, man, my life is I mean, I guess I'm okay. And like if there's not like a big family issue attached to
Mm-hmm.
that, or they're not like flunking school, that the contentment and comparison is typically next on my list of like
Yeah.
who are you looking at to gauge whether your life is good or not.
Yeah. Well, and
So
I think as youth pastors, we got to remember that we fall into those same rhythms. We've basically said that, but I mean, as youth pastors, how often do we get on youth ministry pages and we see all the cool things that people are posting? Like, man,
yeah,
that church just had another mission trip, and they had 75 kids at camp. They had 175 kids at camp. Like, what? They had to take 5 charter buses. Like, and all of a sudden you go, well, I can't even afford one charter. I can't even afford to buy a van. Like, what's
yeah,
going on? And I think we've talked about this on the podcast. I know Brent and I specifically have talked about this at times. Is like sometimes we compare like looking at other churches, but the demographic is completely different. And really, the only thing you should be comparing is your church to your standards and your mission statement.
yeah,
But it's really easy for us to fall into the same trap of seeing these youth ministry groups and seeing what they are posting, which again are their best things. Like, hey, this last week we had an awesome week at camp. We had an awesome mission week, and we did all these things. And here's the pictures, and everyone looks happy and stuff like that. And
yeah,
that's awesome. They don't talk about the headache that led up to it. They don't talk about the
mm-hmm,
finance meetings. They don't talk about the parent meeting where you had 3 parents that were totally against it, or they were mad because you're choosing this camp over another camp, or
yeah. You don't
because
talk about
that's
the you
you
don't
know
talk about the kid that gets sent home from camp because he brings a vape. Like all
yeah, I mean,
the
there's so many other things that come with it.
all
You
the
don't talk
things.
about you don't talk about the fact that you had a blowout on the way hate a mission trip, which literally happened to a friend of ours. You know, like you don't talk about those things as much. You talk
Yeah.
about the highs, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying anything against that, but when we remember that we fall into the same categories and some of the other things, and though we may have some mental capacity and some disciplines in our tool belt to maybe let it go a little bit faster, they may not have that. And so when we can come into it with the empathy of understanding that they're not just, you know, sometimes we treat kids like they're dumb, you know, like, how dare you fall into this? Let's just remember that we fall into it too, you know, so have some empathy as you lead these students through what honestly for some of them is very much an identity crisis.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. Um, I think there's quite a bit of stuff that comes down, and like, even like you said, even with youth ministry, like we're so blinders on of like, oh, like look at this, or and like it doesn't even have to be the camps or anything else. Like the favorite question of a youth pastor is, how many kids do you have?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, that's great, but like, what is that doing in the long run? Like,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, that's just either pumping your ego or it's flattening it,
Mm-hmm.
um, or like you're just making someone else feel like garbage. I mean, like that question's terrible. And so 2 weeks ago, maybe last week, we talked about the whole 10% of the church,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a huge deal. And I mean, we need to kind of keep that at the forefront, especially when we are trying to just keep that mindset of like, it doesn't matter what other people are doing. Am I healthy where I am? And I
Right.
think you hit that on the head there. And so, like, going back to the students though, I really feel like the idea of them not knowing is huge. They don't recognize the impact of what they're doing. They don't recognize the impact that the comparison and the lack of contentment that they are dealing with has on them. And so, as you probably know, if you're listening to this, comparison creates insecurity. It creates discontentment. It creates pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And students don't always connect their feelings to what they're consuming. And so,
Right.
like, I think that's one of the developmental things that's not there. And so when we have this, like, you got to understand is like, students aren't connecting. Well, I watched that reel the other day and now I'm feeling really sad. Like, they don't have that connective ability yet. And so they just feel not enough. They feel left
Mm-hmm.
behind. They feel less than. And students don't just scroll content, they normalize it. I mean, I think there's
Yeah.
a huge reason that if you look at all the massive tech companies, none of their kids have phones, let alone social media, which is a testament in and of itself. And that needs to be
Mm-hmm.
shouted from the rooftops, is like this idea of like, when the people that made the stuff don't let their kids use the stuff, they know the dangers and they're not being honest.
Yeah.
So, but I
Great
guess
point.
the conversation has to move towards the idea though of like, if students don't understand contentment, or students don't understand the comparison game and how that affects them internally, how do we go about teaching um, that clearly? How do we go about this idea of like, not necessarily telling them just, suck it up and get over it, but like, how do we go and work towards articulating the fact of like, hey, what you're watching is affecting you internally too.
Right.
Thoughts?
I think it really depends on the student. Have a good relationship with the student, but even if you don't, like knowing what to say, I think it's always a um, good idea to have sort of a set of questions in the back of your mind with students, especially when it comes to comparison. Be ready to share a story where you struggled with a place of comparison, because it helps them realize that you're not just judging them, because truth be told, students always feel that way. And so I have found that more times than not, when students are sharing something that they're struggling with like that, especially if they don't necessarily have the words or haven't quite identified it, being able to share that you understand what they're going through. I know that sounds really cliche and like, duh, why wouldn't you do that? But I think sometimes we don't. And so we're so quick to, especially us guys, we're so quick to try to get to the solution. That we sometimes forget that, like, to get to the solution, you actually have to journey to it, and we can't just, okay, well, give up your phone. Well, that's not an option. That kind of thing. Like,
To get to the solution, we have to journey to it. Holy cow.
yeah. And that might mean you actually have to marinate it in for a while. That might mean that you don't solve it in one conversation. That might mean you actually have to continue to invest in that student for the long run. Because I can tell you, I have a story of a student that I tried and I tried and I tried, and I finally had to snatch the phone out of bro's hand and say, I will sit in here with you until we have a real conversation, because the guy was struggling and he was going through something really, really hard at home, and he wanted so badly to say it. He was like, I'll just text it to you. And I'm like, no, 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 no. We're not going to do this. Because
Yeah.
I was like, you're so. There wasn't even just a comparison situation. He was so addicted to his phone that he didn't know how to have a real conversation.
Yeah.
And it was very much the Holy Spirit, because I am not the person to do that. If you want to communicate through text, I'll communicate with you. But I felt this strong desire to grab his phone out of his hand, and I
Yeah.
did it gently. I grabbed his phone and I said, I'm just gonna set this to the side and let's talk through this. So it was like, this is clearly, I mean, he was in tears. He wanted to have this conversation, but he didn't have the words. And I said, I will wait all night if that's what it takes. And
Yeah.
he's like, we have youth in 20 minutes. And I said, well, they can either, somebody else can start without me, or we just won't have youth. Whoa, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa, we can't not have youth. And I said, in this moment, you need me more than they do. And
Yeah.
he was like, what? It was, and
Yeah.
in that moment, what he needed was to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
He had spent so much time comparing himself to other people that he was seeing himself through the lenses of what he thought he should be, or what people had curated for him. And so in that moment, I just needed to sort of bring him back to reality. And that's
Yeah.
that's the thing we have to understand, is social media is not real. It's the same thing like talking about reality TV. Reality TV isn't real, folks. It's
Yeah.
curated, it's scripted, and
Yeah.
yet we treat social media like it's real, but it's scripted in a lot of ways. And it may not be necessarily like at 2 o'clock, David enters the office. Like, it's not necessarily that, but like, there is a certain amount of curation and script writing that happens, and these students don't, if they don't feel like they meet a certain benchmark, they struggle with it. And so being ready to be real, but you might actually have to sort of, I say all that to say, sometimes we have to deprogram a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we had to kind of come off of that to get him to a place where he could have a real conversation. And
Sure.
once I basically said we're not having youth until we talk,
Yeah.
he was like, I better get to talking, because I am not going to be the reason why everybody else
Mm-hmm.
misses out. And here's the thing, he told me everything he needed to say in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Still one of the greatest conversations we've ever had. And now
Yeah.
he's a youth pastor in Denver, and he wouldn't mind me sharing that, because he shares it with his students.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you have to have those real conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and to do so, that means you're going to have to journey through the junk
Yeah.
and be ready to ask the hard questions, but also be ready to listen. Again,
Yeah.
we're not just trying to get to an immediate solution. Sometimes you just got to work through it, and that might take days, weeks, months, maybe even years, and that's okay too.
He'll be there for you. But yeah, no, and I think you definitely brought up an interesting idea, and I think it has to be included in this conversation, is the idea of like, we have to create safe spaces. And sometimes safe spaces are away from technology. And then with that, like, the idea is like, we have to strip them of what they're like, of the hindrances, but then also like, we have to go in and be like, hey, look, this isn't just a like, just be grateful that you have what you have conversation. This is a, hey, like, what you're dealing with right now is robbing you of what God gives you.
Yeah.
And so when you are trying to do all these things, when you are trying to compare yourself to this person on the internet, God's sitting up there and being like, well, man, what did I create you for?
Yeah.
Because I created you for a purpose. I created you. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. I know the hairs on your head. I know all these things. And you start talking through those promises. And you have to kind of go to this idea of like, look, it doesn't matter what they do or what they say. Your identity isn't found there.
Yeah.
Your identity is found in Christ. And so then also just like, Christ sets us free from a lot of things. And one of the things that he does is with that freedom of our identity in Christ, it frees us from that trap of comparison.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to worry about what other people think. We don't have to worry about what other people do because our identity isn't based there. And I think the conversation, it bleeds into adulthood all the time. It's like, well, what do you do? And that's what we consider our identity. Like that's the first question that we ask. And so like when we go into these conversations, we have to kind of stop doing, we have to kind of be proactive in our conversations, and we got to stop doing the questions that breed contentment issues. And then finally, like we have to show students and tell students that like, look, you can have confidence without performance. Like you don't have to achieve anything. Jesus achieved it already. Mm-hmm. And so like as leaders, I think that when we create those safe spaces like you're talking about, we have to show this idea of identity. We have to show this idea of freedom from contentment, and then confidence without performance. And then we have to show that their value isn't based on visibility. Like everybody wants a social media channel now. Everybody wants a YouTube. Everybody wants all these things because they feel like it's their only chance to have meaning and have purpose in their lives. And it's like, it's not. We have to show them that their worth isn't measured by likes or attention. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I wish more people that did the social media stuff and did the YouTube channels would show the negative sides and I'm not going to say that like you can't live a life fully doing that, but I wish they would show the negative sides, because when you paint only the positives, everybody wants to be there. And it's like, it's like the same thing with like when you get married and like everybody's talking to you about marriage. If you don't have a good premarital counseling that sits you down and says, hey, guess what? Marriage is going to suck sometimes, but it's always going to be great. And you're like, what? How does that work? It's like, well, it's not going to always be sunshine and rainbows. You're going to have struggles. You're going to have conversations that are hard. Yeah. You're going to deal with life together. And I think like if we were more honest about that approach in our like realm of social media, and we had these social media huge people that came out and was like, hey, like this is a lot of fun, but I also have to deal with this. I have to deal with this. I have to deal with this. I'm self-employed. And you have to go into all these different aspects. And it's like, some of these things are not fun.
Yeah. Totally different tax bracket. And that's another whole conversation, but there's a financial side that is actually really tricky to navigate and way harder than just filling out a W-2, you know?
Mm-hmm. So, well, and that's the thing. And I think that's where we have to go with these conversations. And really, like, I think that's kind of where we have to go for the conversations of just having this in general with like our culture and our media is like, if we're trying to breed this in a healthy fashion, we got to get to the point to where we're starting to show some honesty in these conversations, because we're not demonizing them, but we're showing them that not everybody's cut out to have them, maybe, if that makes sense. And it's for entertainment. It's not for life-altering comparison and contentment issues.
It should be entertainment or a tool.
Yeah.
Used. And we treat it like it's literally our life. It's almost like, I think of The Office when Dwight created a second life. Like
second life.
Yeah, he was like, well, who's your second life character? It's me doing exactly what I'm doing because my life is already awesome, and so I'm just creating a second life. And here's my second life. And it's like, but we joke about it, but it's true. Sometimes we literally are living vicariously through this curated life of what we wish our life actually is, instead of addressing the things that are real. And sometimes the way I look at it is social media, and we've talked about this in the past, especially when we had Stephen Gehring on, is that social media is as much a mind-numbing drug as alcohol and drugs, and actually the effects are worse when you actually look
Yeah.
at the psychology behind it. But so many times we look at it as an opportunity to numb ourselves from
Yeah.
the things that we don't want to face and the things that
Yeah.
we don't, the real things. It's like it's so much easier just to, and I fall into that too. When I'm struggling, when I'm frustrated about something, more
Yeah.
times than not, I just want to like go watch some funny YouTube videos just to like calm down and feel like I'm in a better mood. Like, and I've
Yeah.
even found that I do that a lot before bed. Is I want like if I want to shut my brain down so that I can actually sleep, I gotta like numb it with something funny because if
Yeah.
not, I'm gonna worry about all the things that I need to worry about
Mm-hmm.
and stress out about the things,
Yeah.
and I'll never actually sleep. So
Yeah.
it rewires my brain to think differently, and it's sort of a like a reset for me is the way I
Yeah.
look at it. Is I'll spend 5-10 minutes watching something funny. Usually, Whose Line Is It Anyway? Because it makes me laugh,
It's a solid
and
show.
so I laugh a little bit, I giggle, I kind of get that little mind reset, and I'm like, all right, good, let's go to sleep, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
so we all do it in our own way.
Yeah. No, and that's, and I think that's a big deal, and I think that's one of the things that kind of comes with, like maturing and realizing, hey, like I need these things to, and I think people are drawn to laughter and people are drawn to comedy because it's a resemblance of joy.
Yeah,
Um, and in all reality, like it's the closest thing outside of Jesus, is just comedy and laughter and just
yeah. Joy
enjoying that
brings
time.
gratitude. Gratitude brings contentment, and that
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately, I mean, if you're looking for practical ways to reset, if you're
Yeah.
worried, if you're anxious, if you're struggling, whatever, laughter brings joy. Joy brings
Yeah.
gratitude.
Yeah.
Gratitude brings contentment, and then you sort of close the loop, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah. So as we're kind of getting closer to the end of this episode, I did want to go back on a few things on that creating
Okay.
safe spaces because I think you hit them well, but I want to kind of bullet point them
Yeah. Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
make sure that it's kind of understood. And the thing, and I think David kind of showed this with his story really, really well, is just the idea of students need space to process it, but then they also need to be seen. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's a huge deal. And so how do you do that? You ask open-ended questions, no yeses and nos.
Mm-hmm.
Make them talk, make them
Yeah.
open up. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
awkward as crap because they will sit there and they will be quiet. But you can
Mm-hmm.
ask questions and one of them will eventually get them going.
Yeah.
Secondly, normalize the struggle. Don't act like they're the only person in the world that deals with it. Because if you do, then they're going to feel like even more of a problem.
Yeah.
And so
They'll put a whole.
you have to normalize the struggle. And then share your own experiences appropriately. Let me add, appropriately is the big word attached to that. And I think it's just the idea of like, when we can share common ground on struggles, it opens doors. And so with that, I think there's a lot of importance of like, man, I'm sorry that you're dealing with this. And when you share your struggles, don't make it sound like yours are worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Because that's
it doesn't
comparison too.
it doesn't help anything, and that just makes comparison come back.
Mm-hmm.
So be careful with that. I know a lot
Well,
of
and they
times
can.
we're like, oh well, that's nothing, but like this time I did this, and
Yeah.
it's like you're just causing more of a problem.
Yeah, and it does. It breeds that comparison to the point of going, oh, so my problems aren't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
So there's something wrong. Like your brain goes into there's something wrong with me that I think that I'm making a bigger deal out of this than I should be.
Yeah.
And although that can be healthy, more times than not, it's not because then they go, oh, I just need to get over it. And so what do they do more times than not? They start to squelch those problems instead
Yeah.
of dealing with them.
Yeah.
Because if you squelch it, they're going to follow suit.
Well, and I see the heart and I see the intention behind being like, oh well, that's nothing. I've dealt with worse.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't help though.
It
Like,
doesn't.
so if that's you, you might catch yourself before you do that again. I've done it
Mm-hmm.
multiple times. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not saying I'm
We
innocent
all
in
have.
this at all, but it is something that like it doesn't help the issue. So like try
And
to
if
avoid that when possible.
I would even say if you have done it, now obviously if it was a long time ago, just let it go. But if you find yourself doing that, there's a lot of grace that can be taught if you
Yeah.
actually then go to that person and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I was thinking about it. I was chewing on it. I felt like I didn't handle that very well.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was trying to
Yeah.
do is help you understand that you're not alone in this. And what I think came across is that I was mitigating or I was belittling your
Yeah.
experiences, and that's not what I was trying to do. And
Sure.
so I apologize. You know how, like, students never get apologized to. They're always told all the things that they're doing
Yeah.
wrong and to go fix it. So when you actually go to a student and say, "Hey, I'm really sorry, I got that wrong," even if they didn't notice it, they didn't pick up on it, the fact that
Yeah.
you saw them, I mean, talk about them being seen, the fact that you
Yeah.
saw them enough to go, "Hey, I didn't do the best job in that, so I apologize and I'm owning my part in that."
Yeah.
They go, "Whoa, okay." And it wasn't something where you just had a conversation and they just put, in their mind, they probably think that we just put it out of our mind
Yeah.
immediately. And to know that you're still thinking about it, you're still chewing on it, you're still praying on it, that makes them feel so seen and so
Yeah.
cared about in that moment. And so, and then the intentionality of coming back. So
Sure.
I think we can do a lot of, and that's not just with our students, with your kids too.
Mm-hmm.
Man, some of the best parenting moments I've had are moments where I go, "Dude, I'm sorry, I messed up,"
Yeah.
and for them to also realize that, like, we tend to, as parents, demand a lot of apologies of our kids, and we're not very good at giving it back. And let's be honest, more times than not, we probably should be apologizing more than our kids.
Yeah. No, I mean,
So
it
I think
totally
that
makes sense.
translates to our students too.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And so I think finally, like, to kind of just hit those bullet points again and then add the last one, ask open-ended questions, normalize the struggle, share your own experiences appropriately, and then point them back to the truth.
Yeah.
Like, if you have these conversations and you're not pointing them back to Jesus, you're missing the whole point of having these conversations. Like, yes, it's okay to show kids that they're not alone in these struggles. Yes, it's okay to show kids that, like, they're not, like, isolated or anything to that nature. But if you don't point them back to the fact that Jesus is their identity, that, like, their identity is found through him, and, like, these situations don't have weight on them, like, you're missing the point of the conversation in the first place.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
but it's okay to say, yeah, that affects me too sometimes. Like, I think that's the other thing that kind of normalizes those, is just being open and being honest. Like David said, with apologies and stuff like that, when we show we're human, they're like, oh, okay. I mean, I guess that makes sense. That's a cool, yeah, sure. And so it's super, super important. But I think the key thing, and this is kind of our closing, if you don't talk about comparison with your students, students will still feel it, but they won't know how to fight it. So lead that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You help shape how students see themselves in a world constantly telling them who they should be. I love the reference of Dwight in Second Life. It's like, well, I'd be me. Like, my life is awesome. Like, I think that is the most emotionally healthy response from the most emotionally and socially awkward character of all time.
But how many of us would honestly say that? If you give
Yeah.
me an opportunity to create whatever I want, it's not
Yeah.
going to look anything like what my
Yeah.
life looks like, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that I would change. And honestly, your students are in the same boat.
Yeah.
You know, when they think about it, like, there's a lot of, and I'm not going to go into some of the extra details, but there's a lot of, like, really dangerous things that people would change about themselves.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother conversation
Definitely.
for another day. But I think you guys probably know what I'm getting at with saying that. There's a lot of things that they would change, and some of those things are very deep and impactful things, but also very
Permanent
things. Yeah. Permanent. I'm glad you're picking up on what I'm saying. You know, and so,
and it's being thrown around like candy now.
it is, and students are really worried about these things, and they're curious about these things, and curiosity is what gets us in more trouble than not, especially at that age. You know, all the times
Curiosity,
I got in the most trouble
yeah,
is just because I was curious. What would happen if, What would happen if I took an axe can and a lighter? How far can I make that flame go? Like that was the dumb things we did as kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean,
Yeah.
it's that same brain, that same
Sure.
rationale that makes people do all kinds
Yeah.
of things. And so
100%.
we got to remember that as we go.
Yeah. Well, as we close, like I said, we're rooting for you. We're praying for you. There is obviously we're all kind of in crunch time with summer and everything else, and squeezing in things when we can, and being home with families as much as we can. And at the end of the day, just a reminder: family is your most important ministry.
Yeah.
If you are listening to this and you are married, you should be spending and being more intentional with them regularly than you are at church. And like I think a lot of times we flip that and we're like, well, the church needs me. It's like, no, the church doesn't need you. Realistically, like if we want to go into that context, Jesus doesn't even need you. God doesn't even need you. I think it's Acts 19 that says, God is not served by human hands as though he needed anything. It's just this idea of like, we have the privilege to work alongside God. Don't let that ego inflate. God doesn't need you. You have the privilege and the opportunity to serve alongside. So with that being said, God gifted you and entrusted you with a family. Make sure that comes first. And everything else will fall into place. So, but with that being said, hope you are all having a great summer. Hope that you are all surviving camps and mission trips and all the other activities that come with it. And with that being said, we're going to close as we normally do. I'm going to close this in prayer, and then we will call this an episode. God, we thank you for today. We thank you for the pastors that are listening to this. And God, I pray that as they're kind of maybe analyzing themselves and analyzing their students and where they fit in this comparison with social media trap, I just pray that you will give them discernment. I pray that you'll give them wisdom on how to handle these situations. And ultimately, God, I just pray that you begin to open doors for those conversations to take place. And if it's a conversation that they themselves need to have and they're the one that's stuck in the comparison trap, God, I just pray that you open a door for a conversation where someone else can be that person that listens and that person that gives wise counsel to the youth pastor that needs it. I just pray for the rest of this summer as we continue. God, just give us safety when we travel. Give us discernment when we speak to students. And God, just give us supernatural energy to keep going and keep doing what we need to do for the students that you've entrusted us with and the families that we have around us. We just thank you for this time. And God, we just pray that you, as always, don't allow your word to return void. And God, allow your word and allow your spirit to transform the hearts and minds of students this summer. We thank you and we love you. Amen.